As a single mother, Sarah's life revolved around her 7-year-old daughter, Emily. They lived in a quaint cottage on the outskirts of Hollifield, a town renowned for its serene beauty and eerie legends. Sarah, a history teacher, loved the old tales but never believed them, until one winter night. It was the week before Christmas, and Hollifield was blanketed in snow. Sarah and Emily returned from a shopping trip in the town center, their arms laden with gifts and festive decorations. That evening, as they decorated their Christmas tree, a soft knock echoed through the cottage. Sarah opened the door to find a beautifully wrapped gift on the doorstep, with no note or indication of the sender. Intrigued and assuming it was from a neighbor, Sarah brought the gift inside. Emily begged to open it, and Sarah, swept up in the holiday spirit, agreed. Inside the box was an antique doll, exquisitely dressed in Victorian clothing, its glass eyes shimmering in the firelight. Emily was enchanted. That night, strange things began to happen. Sarah awoke to faint whispers, thinking it was Emily talking in her sleep. But when she checked, Emily was sound asleep, the doll clutched tightly in her arms. The next few days saw more odd occurrences, doors creaking open, cold drafts, and the feeling of being watched. Sarah attributed these to the old house's quirks, yet something felt off. On Christmas Eve, Sarah tucked Emily into bed and went downstairs to finish wrapping gifts. The house was silent except for the occasional crackling from the fireplace. As she reached for the scissors, she heard it again, the faint whisper, but this time, it was clearer, almost like a child's voice. Terrified, Sarah rushed upstairs to Emily's room. The sight that greeted her was horrifying. The doll was standing on its own, its glass eyes glowing faintly in the dark, and Emily was nowhere to be seen. Panicked, Sarah searched the house, calling out for her daughter, but there was no response. Returning to Emily's room, she found a note under the doll, written in a childlike scrawl, "I've found a new friend. We're playing hide and seek. Come find us." The realization hit Sarah like a bolt of lightning. The legends of Hollifield spoke of a spirit, trapped within an ancient doll, that sought a human companion. The story ended with Sarah's desperate search for Emily, leading her deep into the snow-covered woods of Hollifield. The final scene left readers with a chilling image, Sarah, standing at the edge of an icy pond, the doll's laughter echoing around her, as faint footprints led onto the frozen surface, disappearing into the night. It was the week before Christmas, and I found myself driving through a thick blanket of snow to a remote cabin in Whispering Pines, a secluded town known for its picturesque winter landscapes. I was an avid writer, seeking solitude to finish my novel. The cabin, rented through an obscure online service, was described as a peaceful retreat. Arriving late in the evening, I was greeted by the faint glow of Christmas lights adorning the cabin. The key was left under the mat, as instructed by the host in our brief online exchange. The place was cozy, with a rustic charm, and a small Christmas tree in the corner of the living room added to the festive atmosphere. That night, as I settled in, an uneasy feeling crept over me. The wind howled outside, its whispers seeming to carry voices. I shrugged it off as the product of my overactive imagination and went to bed. The next morning, I awoke to find small things amiss, a book misplaced, a chair slightly moved. It was subtle, but enough to unsettle me. I spent the day writing, occasionally glancing out the window at the serene, snow-covered pines. As night fell, the feeling of unease grew. The wind's whispers turned into murmurs, almost like hushed conversations. Trying to focus, I worked until exhaustion took over and I drifted into an uneasy sleep. In the dead of night, a sound woke me, the soft creak of a floorboard. My heart raced as I lay still, listening. The cabin was silent again, but the feeling of being watched was palpable. I mustered the courage to check the cabin. The front door was slightly ajar, letting in a cold breeze. I quickly locked it and searched the cabin, but found no one. The next few nights were a blur of paranoia and fear. I heard movements outside the cabin, saw shadows flit past the windows, and the whispers grew louder, more insistent. On Christmas Eve, the true horror revealed itself. I awoke to find the cabin eerily quiet. The Christmas tree lights flickered, casting dancing shadows. As I stepped into the living room, the air turned icy. In the dim light, I saw footprints in the snow leading to the window, but none leading away. Then, the whispers crescendoed into a chilling laugh that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. The room spun, and I felt a presence, something ancient and malevolent. In a moment of terror-fueled clarity, I realized the cabin was a trap, a lure used by something otherworldly, preying on lone visitors. I fled into the night, the laughter echoing behind me. As I drove away, I saw, in the rearview mirror, the cabin disappearing, as if it had never been there. Back in the safety of my home, the experience haunted me. Whispering Pines and the Christmas cabin existed on no map. The online rental service had no record of my booking. It was as if the cabin was a ghost, existing only to ensnare the unwary. That Christmas marked a turning point in my life. The festive cheer was forever tainted by the memory of that night, a chilling reminder of the unknown horrors that lurk in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. It was December 23, 2020, and the festive lights on Winterfield Lane in our small town of Carson, Vermont, couldn't dispel the sense of dread that had settled over me since last week's chilling discovery. The story begins 5 years ago when my neighbor, Mr. Thompson, lost his teenage daughter, Emily. The whole neighborhood was shaken by the news, and when the police investigation turned up nothing, we all mourned her as gone. Mr. Thompson and his wife became reclusive, shadows of their former selves, which was understandable. We'd occasionally exchange greetings, but there was always a sorrowful distance in their eyes. Last week, however, something changed. Mr. Thompson, an old man of about 60, knocked on my door, asking to borrow a ladder. His demeanor was anxious, a stark contrast to his usual subdued self. I obliged, curious about what he needed it for. Later that day, from my upstairs window, I saw him in his backyard, placing the ladder against the house beneath Emily's old bedroom window, now always shuttered. He climbed up and disappeared into the room. This alone was strange, but what I saw next chilled me to the bone. In the fading light of the evening, Mr. Thompson re-emerged with a large, heavy-looking black bag. He struggled to get it down the ladder and then dragged it across the yard to his shed. The way he glanced around, his movements hasty and nervous, made me feel uneasy. As night fell and the Christmas lights twinkled eerily on Winterfield Lane, I couldn't shake the image of that bag from my mind. At around midnight, unable to sleep, I looked out my window and saw light coming from Mr. Thompson's shed. Driven by a mix of concern and fear, I decided to investigate. I crept across the snow-covered lawn to the shed. The door was ajar, and inside, Mr. Thompson was digging a hole in the ground. The bag lay to the side, partially open, revealing what looked disturbingly like a human hand. My heart racing, I stumbled back home, unsure of what to do. The next morning, Christmas Eve, the shed was locked, and there was no sign of the hole or the bag. Mr. Thompson avoided me, his eyes darting away whenever our paths crossed. But the most disturbing part came later that day. As I was setting up for our small Christmas Eve dinner, I glanced out the window and saw Mr. Thompson watching me from his house. When our eyes met, he quickly closed the blinds. His expression was one of desperation and guilt, a haunting visage that will forever be etched in my memory. I haven't told anyone, not even my wife, about what I saw. The fear of what might lie beneath the surface of our quaint Winterfield Lane, the possibility that the truth behind Emily's disappearance was hidden in plain sight all these years, is a burden too heavy to bear. Now, as Christmas Day approaches, I find myself questioning everything I thought I knew about my neighbor. The festive cheer of the season has been overshadowed by a dark, unspeakable secret, and I am left wondering if I should delve further into the mystery or let sleeping horrors lie.